Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary.
Good to see you.
We hear a lot of talk from all of us, including the administration, about keeping tuition down and lowering college costs. Yet I have a letter here, which I'd ask consent to put in the record, from all of the Tennessee independent colleges and universities. This is what Senator Blunt mentioned. These are the nonprofit institutions in our state, most of them church schools, smaller schools. The nonprofit colleges and universities across our country attract about 15% of all of our students. And this is what they wrote about the new overtime rule. One of our members, the letter says, calculated that the first-year impact would translate to a $1,000 per student increase in tuition. $1,000 increase in tuition from a rule from the Department of Labor. It says it's expected that the change will cost each four-year campus a minimum of $1.3 million. Another rural campus noted the change would impact 133 employees for a total of $3.2 million. If they choose, however, to reclassify those employees to an hourly schedule from a salary status, a mere 5 hours of annual collective overtime would cost $1.1 million, and 10 hours would cost $2.3 million. Mr. Secretary, we can't keep imposing new good-sounding regulation costs on any segment of American society, but if the president's going to go around, and I'm going to go around, and all of us are going to go around saying we want to keep college costs down, how can you justify an overtime rule that might raise the cost of college by $1,000 per student? This organization, of all of the independent and nonprofit colleges in Tennessee, says they don't oppose increasing the current minimum salary threshold. They think that might even help make sure that white-collar exemptions are not abused, but the proposed salary threshold is simply too high too fast, and the increased threshold would result in the inappropriate classification of many employees. So my question is, why would you impose on independent colleges and universities a rule that the colleges say could raise tuition by $1,000 per student? And while you're answering that question, maybe you could tell me, when do you think this rule will become final?
Well, let me ask your second question first. We sent this over to OMB earlier this week, Monday or Tuesday, and so their review has commenced. And so I expect, I don't know exactly when that will be completed, but we expect it to be completed within the next 45 to 90 days, something like that. On the issue of higher ed, again, before we put the rule out, we had outreach with higher ed to hear them. We had outreach with nonprofits to hear how this rule would impact them, what they do. In 2004, when a new rule was put into place, there was impact on retail, on higher ed, on nonprofits.
Mr. Secretary, this is $1,000 per student, and this is a prestigious group of every single college in Tennessee that's a nonprofit college. That's an outrageous number.
Well, again, we have received a lot from higher ed, and when we've discussed minimum wage, we've heard a lot of we've heard a lot of feedback about impacts of minimum wage. When we did the coal dust rule, we also heard a lot of impact. And what we've learned in the implementation of the coal dust rule is that we now have had 99% of our new tests in the coal dust rule have been under the new level.
So you just think they're wrong? You think they're wrong?
Well, I don't know whether they're right or wrong. I'm simply saying in the coal context, the concerns that were raised that we would never be able to meet this new standard. The good news is that they have been able to meet that new standard. We take very seriously.
I don't mean to be rude. I've got another 40 seconds.
Sure.
I just want to ask one more question about rules. Yesterday, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission held a public hearing on a proposed rule that would increase by 20 times the employment data it collects from 67,000 employers on their 63 million employees. Increase by 20 times the employment data it collects from 67,000 private employers on 63 million employees. I introduced a bill to suggest that before the EEOC collects this massive amount of data from private employees that it first collected from all the federal employees and see how much time it takes. Now, this is a rule that in one form your department planned to issue at one point. You were going to do it through the Federal Contract Compliance Program. Since the EEOC is proposing to collect this kind of data from all private employers, will you now withdraw your similar rule to collect that same kind of data from federal contractors?
Yes, and we're working with the EEOC on that initiative because we got feedback that given the EEOC's work, it's more efficient to work through the EEOC and the EEO1 form. So the answer to your question is yes.
If I had more time, Mr. Chairman, I would ask, don't you think it'd be a good idea to give yourself the federal government a dose of its own medicine by collecting all this information from all the federal employees before we impose it on the private employers? But I don't have time for that question.
Senator